Monday in Holy Week. The way of Jesus, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross. Jesus had come at other times to the holy city to be redeemed as the firstborn by the offering of 2 doves. As a child, getting lost and found amongst the learned people. Once again, people would be bivouacking out on the hills. As night fell, fires would glow, old men would talk, and children would listen. Stories of the great David and greater Solomon, the hardship of the times and the cruelty of Roman rule, and the crucifixion of 6,000 slaves along the Appian Way after a rebellion. Talk of the prophet John recently beheaded, and the preacher from Nazareth. What was he going to do for them? People looked for him after all the excitement of the previous day, when he had taken the city by storm, riding in on a donkey. But they looked quietly. He was wanted at the temple too. Word must have got round. Hadn't he brought Lazarus back from the dead? Perhaps if he had power over death, he could throw out the Romans and they would be defeated like the Egyptians long ago. In the temple, there must have been secret conversations going on. Would not do for anyone to think there was nothing to consider but this upstart, arrogant prophet. But they were learned men and knew they could not afford to be caught napping during the feast. Well, perhaps he would have enough sense to lie low. Those who were afraid of confrontation or were squeamish about turning in a harmless visionary hoped for that. And where are we? We have been preparing each in our own way. It is not the quantity of things that we do, but the quality that matters. And we are not the judge of that, for only God sees into the hearts of all men. One way that has been out of fashion for a while is of linking prayer with fasting. It is good to abstain, to make do with far less than we normally eat. We can manage on far less than we think we can. Our Lord fasted 40 days and nights, just within the limits. You may remember hearing that at 40 days, a hunger fast becomes rather critical. In Bedford, there is a powerful witness to fasting in the Miracle Church. As a community or congregation, they begin a fast on Maundy Thursday that will last until Easter Eve, when they will break their fast, and then fast again until their communion in the evening of Easter Day. This is not just an act of love, sharing in the Lord's hardships. It's also a means by which the mind is clarified. I wonder if it is too old-fashioned these days to talk of clarifying fat. You take all the remnants of fat from the meat, bits of lard and bacon ends, heat it to boiling point, and then add water and leave it. In time, all the goodness comes together on the surface, and the dregs are disposed of in the bin. Fasting brings together all the diverse and wandering sides of our nature, bringing them together, binding them, discarding on the way the unproductive and unnecessary bits of nonsense we collect from day to day. By this discipline, God is able to sharpen the vision, touch the heart, and strengthen the will. It is also a means of sharing with a hungry world, as years ago, when Sister Joyce came back from Ghana in the years of famine, she stood and wept over the full freezers in our cellar. It is not unusual for people of that congregation to do a 4-hour, 6-hour, maybe 24-hour fast as an aid to prayer. And indeed, the carer who relieved me for a week in 2009, a young African woman, was doing a 12-hour fast with prayer when she came to us to start her work. Whatever we may do, it is to the God of the living that we come, who judges us, not from outside, but from within. To those who are truly sorry, he is gentle. It was G.K. Chesterton who wrote of the scene where Jesus was left alone with the woman taken in adultery. Great mercy and great misery stood together. But Jesus had other words for those who prided themselves that they were safely on the right road, who used holy things as a cover-up for their own greed, and were confident they had a hotline to God. It was with these words that he came to the temple on Monday in Holy Week, following on his look around the previous night before going out to Bethany. Remember, he had not come to overturn temple worship. He was to be himself the fulfillment of all sacrifices. His own presentation and Mary's purification had been ratified by the offering of 2 doves. Now he was to be the completion of all rituals and sacrifice. He called not for prayer rather than sacrifice, not even for righteousness, but for penitence. The Pharisee and the publican had both come for the same reason, to offer worship. The publican was bowed down by the sins he had committed, and no doubt the knowledge that being weak he would commit more. But he was the one who truly depended on God's mercy. The other could hardly see God for his own self-image. So the wrath of Christ descended like a hurricane on the backs of the dealers. Their trade was lawful, but their greed squeezed every penny they could out of the poor who came there to perform their duties. They twisted and tuned the name of Yahweh to their tills. And what of the crowds? Intent on their religious duties and full of talk as they met up with relatives and friends. The news of last year, of different parts of Galilee. Thoughts of the Messianic kingdom, where every man would sit under his vine and his fig tree. No sign of it yet, with Herod still in the pocket of Rome, and taxes that crippled a man. But still, here in the temple is the sign of God's favor. Nobody could have missed the dramatic events of the previous day, the entry of the prophet from Nazareth. And everyone would add their bit to the tale. Such a strange, quiet figure in the midst of it all. The shouting around him, yet dignified too, almost untouched by it. Many a zealot would have given his ears for such an entry. So the talk ran on as they bought their animals for sacrifice, and the dealers were probably doing rather well out of the hubbub. For with all the exchange of ideas, the pilgrims haggled less about prices and moved on, talking as the cash rang down on the tables of the money changers. The court of the temple was large, but would be full even so, and in its centre the priests performed their office, just as Zechariah had done some 30 years before, when the angel spoke to him of the son his aging wife would bear to him. But this was not a day of annunciation or good news, it was a day of crisis. The gossip among the servants of the sanctuary would be punctuated with anxiety about what that Jesus would be up to today. When the acts of worship were over, they would need to talk together and plan a strategy. Jesus was already ahead of them. He reached the temple and with his own private thoughts. And by his very presence, he convicted all that was wrong. But he was not content with that. He must openly and instinctively claim authority over it all. My Father's house, my house shall be called a house of prayer, but you have made it a den of thieves. What a tumult! The animals set free and running to and fro in panic. The money changers grovelling on the floor for the money tossed everywhere. And the anger of the man like an avenging angel of God, flying to and fro until all the cheating networks of scheming greed had been reduced to chaos. Jesus lays down the second challenge. With the first, he rode in like a king to a tumultuous welcome. Now he claims the right to correct corruption in the temple, and so to judgment in the way of the cross. He spoke for the weak and sinned against, those whose needs could barely be heard, and he spoke to those who had the power to do something, but instead colluded with evil. So often we can collude almost in ignorance or for fear of repercussions. Jesus never promised us safety in the way of the cross, but he promised life. And just as he stood over against the temple abuse, so he stands over against our comfortable little ways. If we accept life at his wounded hands, then we accept his judgment, the judgment that he endured and which led him and will lead us in the way of the cross. All our prayer groups, societies, celebrations, meetings, they are dangerous. At any time from within them may come a challenge, like a sword. A challenge that challenges our determination to have things our own way. Danger is part of life. We are born in danger and are often in danger of dying unexpectedly. Noah could have been too frightened to get out of the safety of the ark and face God and the new life and responsibilities. Perhaps conditions inside pushed him out more readily, but what lay ahead? He had to get out, and so do we, out of our comfort zone, live alongside the man of Galilee, and face judgment. The judgment that has no room for cheats, but embraces all penitence. And what is a penitent? Just one who says, I have sinned, and I will try by God's grace not to sin again. If we stay within our chosen spiritual shell, engorged in spiritual overweight, because we do not use the grace we have received, then the Christ of the temple will overturn our little idols and convict us of an inwardly blind religion. So we look at Jesus steadily moving all the time towards the coming event, the cross. Death has a way of concentrating our minds, of getting our thoughts into focus, of stripping away the unworthy, the inessentials. Some years ago, I knew a couple stricken with a terrible grief, the death of a child. It became a barrier between them. For while the father found God in the heart of his agony, the mother carried bitterness, well hidden in her soul. There came a time when cancer laid its ugly hand upon her as well. Yet, in the knowledge of the way that leads to death, she found life, acceptance, and renewed union with her husband and family. There was no further need to struggle in that fearful battle of bitterness, for she was going home. So with Jesus, he is going home. Through cruel agony of heart and soul and body, he will embrace all the agony of men. There will be no place where he has not been. The judge of all, the living God incarnate, has many things to suffer, but for the joy that is set before him, he will endure the cross.